Shadow in the snowy forest. The snow muffled everything, sound, scent, even time itself. A pale silence, heavy and unbroken, sprawled across the Ardennes. Or maybe it wasn't the Ardennes. Everything looked the same under Frost's heavy hand. Frost and war. I was alone now. Yates was gone. The last time I saw him, his breath had left his lips in a thin, white plume, just a wisp against the freezing air. I didn't see the bullet hit him. I only saw him fold, like a marionette with its strings slashed. It had happened so fast, too fast. The Germans were retreating. Shells had turned the banks of the Scheldt into a churn of mud and blood. We'd been told the snow would cover the bodies, but it only half did. Some things refused to stay buried. Now I moved like a shadow. They said I was the best shot in the unit, but it didn't feel like skill anymore. It felt like instinct. Or something darker. I had tracked a patrol for 2 hours, belly low to the ice-crusted ground, breath held, heartbeat measured. One by one, they dropped. No hesitation. No questions. No names. But the forest had begun to press closer. The snow whispered. The trees groaned under their heavy coats. And sometimes, just sometimes, I could hear something else. Steps. Soft. Careful. I wasn't alone. At night, I dreamed of Yates. Not the way he died, but the way he looked before all this. Laughing over burnt coffee, cursing the damp. He had a girl back home, Mary. Marcy. I should have remembered, but war makes you forget the soft things. But tonight wasn't for dreaming. The forest smelled sharp. Pine resin. Cold metal. Blood. I caught movement through the trees. Just a flicker. A silhouette too small to be a threat. A boy. No older than 16. He wore the Wehrmacht gray. Frost clung to his eyelashes. He held a rifle awkwardly, as if it didn't belong in his hands. I raised my scope. I exhaled slowly, my finger resting just outside the cold curve of the trigger. The scope narrowed the world to a circle of pale light and shifting branches. A heartbeat pulsed in my ears, steady, even. The boy moved cautiously, scanning the trees as if he felt me watching. No, not felt. He knew. The rifle he held trembled slightly, the barrel dipping with every shallow breath he took. Too young for war. Too young to kill. But they had sent him here anyway, into this frozen hell, to die in a forest he couldn't even name. I should have taken the shot, but I didn't. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of damp wool and gun oil. I held my position, barely more than a smear against the snow-draped earth. Snowflakes collected on my shoulders, blending me into the landscape. It wasn't just camouflage anymore. I was becoming the woods. The boy took another step. Crunch. Soft. Hesitant. He knelt, adjusting the strap of his rifle, and I saw his face more clearly, pale, thin, cheeks hollowed by hunger. His lips were cracked from the cold. And then a whisper of movement to my left. Another soldier. This one older. Hardened. The officer's coat stretched tight over a thick frame. His breath curled in pale plumes, fogging the air as he signaled the boy to move forward. They were searching. Hunting. For me. I adjusted my aim. The officer first. The shot was clean, precise. A hollow crack shattered the winter hush. He dropped without sound, eyes wide, a dark stain spreading across the white frost. The boy flinched, staggering back. His eyes locked on mine, just for an instant, through the scope's cold glass. And then he ran. I let him. Something twisted deep in my chest, something I hadn't felt since Yates died. Hesitation. Weakness. I whispered his name into the frost. Yates. He didn't answer. But the forest did. The echo of my shot faded, replaced by a deeper silence. Heavy. Watching. Snow sifted from the branches, stirred by nothing. There were no birds here. No life but the trees. And me. I moved. Slow. Calculated. Each step measured, heel to toe, shifting weight carefully to avoid the ice beneath the snowpack. My rifle was warm against my chest. The breath fogging from my lips was the only thing betraying I was still alive. I knew what was coming. The boy would tell them. More would come. They always came. And every time I made them pay. But tonight felt different. It wasn't just the blood cooling on the snow. It wasn't the boy's pale, frightened face burned into the back of my mind. It was the shadow, a presence I couldn't explain, a feeling at the edges of my senses, like something old pressing in, watching through the frost. I remembered the stories they whispered in the trenches. Miss, old things. They said that when the snow fell so heavy it swallowed sound, the forest remembered. They said the dead never truly left these woods. But that was just fear talking, wasn't it? I pushed forward, following the boy's trail. I could still hear his footsteps, light, erratic, weaving between the pines. He was lost, afraid, and yet I followed. Not to kill him. I told myself I only wanted to make sure he didn't lead others back. But the truth was colder than the snow beneath my knees. I was following because I wasn't sure what would happen when I caught him. Because some part of me, the part that remembered Mary's name, the part that still felt human, wanted him to live. The boy's footprints cut erratic patterns in the snow, weaving through frostbitten pines and the skeletal remains of dead undergrowth. He was moving without direction now. Lost. I followed at a distance. Not too close. Not yet. The forest felt heavier, quieter. The wind had died completely, leaving only the hush of my breath and the whisper of snow shifting beneath my boots. The deeper I moved, the more it felt like the trees themselves were closing in, watching. A branch snapped far off. I dropped, flattening against the snow, the rifle steady against my shoulder. My pulse was a drum, slow and certain. The boy's trail led toward a ravine, the ground dipping into a narrow cut where shadows pooled thick and blue in the half-light. I could see him now. He was slouched against a tree, clutching his rifle with both hands, his face pale, lips trembling from the cold or the fear. I could take the shot. The wind wouldn't shift. The angle was clean. I could end this before he even knew I was there. But my fingers stayed loose on the trigger. He hadn't fired. He hadn't called for help. He hadn't even raised his weapon. And yet, I could feel it again. The presence. No sound. No movement. But it was there, just beyond the edges of sight. Something watching. I shifted slightly, adjusting my position, and that's when I saw it. A second figure, half shrouded by the trees, barely visible where the snow tangled with shadows. Motionless. Still. No breath clouding the air. No sign of life. I stared harder, but the shape didn't move. Trick of the light? Or something worse? The old stories stirred again, unbidden. The ones whispered by men too long in the mud, men who swore they'd seen things that didn't belong in this world. They called it der Geist, the ghost. Said it walked where the blood soaked deepest. I thought them fools. Until now. The boy shifted. His head snapped toward a shape in the trees. He saw it too. And he was afraid. He raised his rifle, but too slow. The figure surged forward, pale against the gloom. I fired. The shot cracked, echoing back in a chorus of dying sound. The figure collapsed. But when the smoke cleared, the only thing on the ground was a lifeless pine bough, broken clean through where the bullet struck. No body. The boy bolted. I cursed, rising from my cover, breaking the spell of silence as I pursued. Snow thrashed around me. He ran blindly, half stumbling, rifle forgotten, too terrified to think. He wasn't afraid of me. He was running from whatever else was out here. The ravine narrowed, walls steep with frost-covered stone. The trees thinned, and then the ground ended. A frozen river. The ice was pale thin, weak enough to betray itself with a faint creak beneath my weight. The boy was halfway across. I raised my rifle again. The shot would be perfect. But I hesitated. Not because of the ice. Not because of him. But because I felt it again. Behind me. Closer this time. I turned. Nothing. Only snow. But the shadows felt deeper now. And I knew somehow this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ice shifted beneath my boots with a sound like old bones creaking. The boy had stopped, crouched near the far bank, his breath clouding the air in ragged bursts. He was trapped, and I had him. The shot would be easy now. Too easy. But my finger refused to tighten on the trigger. Snow drifted in lazy curtains between us, muffling the world. The forest held its breath. So did I. The presence was still there. Closer now. Watching. I scanned the tree lean, heart thudding slow measured. Cold had settled deep in my bones, the kind that wasn't just winter, but something heavier. I wasn't alone out here, but I was the only living thing. The old stories whispered again, shadows clinging to the edges of my mind. They said the forest remembered. They said some who died here never left. The ice cracked. The boy flinched, rising unsteadily to his feet. His eyes met mine across the frozen river. Wide, hollow, pleading. And in that moment, I saw Yates again. Not the broken body, not the blood in the snow, but the way he had looked before. Tired, cold, human. I lowered the rifle. Go, I whispered. But the boy didn't move. The ice shifted again, groaning under his weight. His gaze dropped to the pale surface, and I knew it wouldn't hold. I stepped forward, and that's when it happened. The shadow moved, not imagined, not just some flicker of snow and light. A shape, pale, indistinct, shifting between the trees. The outline of a man, but distorted. Wrong. I froze. The boy saw it too. He turned, eyes wide with a fear deeper than death. His rifle dropped into the snow, and then the ice shattered beneath him. The sound was sharp, brutal, like a bone snapping in the cold. He plunged into the black water. I didn't think. I ran. The ice cracked under me, spiderwebbing, threatening to give way, but I didn't stop. Didn't breathe. The river was swallowing him. I dropped to my knees, plunging both hands into the freezing dark, gripping fabric. His coat, hauling, straining. His face broke the surface, pale, gasping. Hold on. I dragged him up. The ice shrieked but held. Somehow, we collapsed on the far bank, breath ragged, steam curling from our lips. His face was blue with frost. Alive, but barely. And then, that presence. Behind us. I turned slowly, rifle raised. The figure in the woods stood clear now. A soldier. Not German. Canadian. His face pale. His uniform torn and soaked with frost. Bullet hole through his chest. No breath. No life. Yet his eyes. Familiar. Yates. But it couldn't be. Could it? The ghost watched me. Not with anger. Not with accusation. But with sadness. And then, as the wind stirred the snow, he was gone. Only silence remained. The boy stirred beside me, coughing weakly. Still alive. Still human. And I knew, with a certainty colder than the frost, I had been spared, not by skill or strength, but by mercy. And it was time to go home.